It was a difficult week, very depressing week. I'm sure you saw Hamas, the terrorist group that runs Gaza, broke into Israel, killed over 1,300 people, men, women, and children. And then the college kids in America went full Trump and said there's very fine people on both sides. What is going on? 34 Harvard student associations signed a letter that basically threw their lot in with the killers. But there was a backlash because some CEOs said when these kids now go for a job, they're going to be blacklisted. And a lot of the students are still standing by their position to support the war criminals, but they strenuously object to the word blacklist. Even Kanye said, that is some anti-Semitic bullshit.
Good morning. It's Monday, Medal of Honor Monday, October the 16th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Stuart, Varney, My Take, No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, Rules for Patriots, Rules for Retrogrades, Ayn-Rand Quote, Bishop-Barron, sen-ted-cruz, and the awarding of the Medal of Honor. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch. 250 economic truths from David-Bahnsen.
Minimum wage. The real problem is that workers are not so much underpaid as they are underskilled, and the real task is to help those people become skilled. Congress cannot do this simply by declaring that as of such and such a date, everybody's productive output is now worth $7.25 per hour, or $15 per hour. This makes about as much sense and does just about as much harm as doctors curing patients simply by declaring that they are cured. Walter Williams. If everyone in the minimum wage policy debate could absorb this message, the entire debate could go away. We don't lose weight by altering our scales, and we don't solve for the value of output, the price of wages, by declaring the value to be higher. We solve for output, that is, the value of the productivity. If the same effort went into cultivating the skills of our workforce as goes into altering the free exchange, involved labor transactions, we could end this controversy once and for all.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Self-betrayal, As we have seen, there are various inner motivations which may lead to the crime of disloyalty or treason. Sometimes these motivations operate very subtly, in ways unknown to the subject. Sometimes treason is merely a crude selling out to those who pay best. Let us try to arrange and classify some of these motivations, starting with the unconscious ones and ranging towards deliberate treason. In the first place, an act of self-betrayal may begin as a defense against the feeling of being lost and rejected. In order to win acceptance in a group, the individual may hide and not defend his private beliefs and convictions when attacked. In psychology, this may be called, if such passive behavior becomes an unconscious habit, the passive submission to and identification with the stronger person. If you cannot beat the enemy, join him. A. Freud. Although the concept of the inner traitor in us is not so easy to accept, by studying the contrasting inner drives that lead man, one becomes more convinced of that possibility. The clinical concept of man's inner ambivalence is based on numerous psychological experiences. In studying the deeper motivations of many a traitor, we often see that his treacherous act happened after an inner turmoil threatened to break him down, to make an uncontrolled nervous wreck out of him. It is as if the future mental patient preferred surrender to outward enemy rather than to the inward enemies of disease and nervous breakdown. Hess was on the verge of a schizophrenic breakdown when he broke Hitler's rules and flew to England. Let us consider the British Foreign Office spies, Donald Maclean and Guy Burgess. Both showed several symptoms of imminent mental breakdown. It may be known to the reader that both these men left England in May 1951 in order to go via France to Russia. Both deliberately fled the country. Both had communist leanings during their student days at Cambridge, but later renounced their adolescent affiliations. Both showed abnormal symptoms during their service. Maclean had a breakdown in May 1950 due to overwork and excessive drinking. Burgess was reprimanded for reckless driving while in service and for neglect of his work. Reading through the report, one is surprised by the amount of mental instability which was tolerated at such a sensitive spot of the government. Both the men had homosexual leanings that can be related to a suppressed hostility for their mothers and mother country. Text of Britain's Report on Inquiry, The New York Times, September 24, 1955. Time, October 3, 1955. Sometimes treason means a one-sided appeal to justice. This is found in the man who demands some sort of private protective justice and who refuses to acknowledge the subtle relationship between rights and duties. Such professions always feel continually deprived and betrayed. They are what Burglar calls the injustice collectors. In their acts of disloyalty, they are seeking to play the role of their own private judges. Many querulous and even paranoid persons have this kind of character structure. Then there is the disappointed pseudo-idealist who gradually turns into a cynic, covering his emptiness by many self-justifications and exculpations. Such people betray their intellectual disappointment in all their debunking remarks. Conflicts between parents may give rise in the child to the need to betray one or both parents, and this need may be transferred in later life to the need to betray the fatherland. I have often found that the unsolved tears of hate and love toward the parents play an important role in forming the turncoat personality. As we saw, this problem often lies at the root of the totalitarian character structure. Although the totalitarian-minded are not by definition overt traitors, some of these people can easily become traitors to free democratic ideals, neither out of compulsive allegiance to a foreign ideology or out of repetitive nonconformism. In describing special characteristics of a political group, one has to keep in mind that basic inner contrasts are inherent in all people. The quasi-rational Marxistic interpretation of the world, which satisfies the need for logical clarification and reasonable organization of social life, covers anxiety created by the irrational inner forces so easily detected in the totalitarian-minded. The cult of the masses often serves as a defense against loneliness. The belief in progress may be born out of vague despair and insecurity. The fear of deviationism is the fear that the unity of the group will be broken. Suspicion and self-criticism serve to keep, above all, the in-group together. There are several forms of inner conceit that can turn man into a traitor. The Dutch philosopher of whom I spoke earlier is an example of this, as are any of the verbose ideological apologists for totalitarianism. Lack of confidence or lack of belief in the guiding traditions and aims of one's own society can also lead to hostility, then to treason. Without such traditional beliefs, suggestibility and receptivity for competing ideologies are increased. The Klaus Fuchs case, which was mentioned earlier, is an example of this. The personal need to be a pioneer or a martyr, often instilled by the unconscious need to suffer, may lead to a private messianic delusion and cause an attack on the traditional values of the group. Many groups consider such extremism as treacherous behavior. Another form of self-betrayal may be caused by the inability to grasp the complexity of the real world. Many people have been seduced into unstable behavior and even disloyalty through lack of comprehension of these complexities and through the need to find a single, all-embracing, easy answer to the problems of human life. Who gives them the simple myth to believe in? The Nazis seduced nearly all Germany into a form of ideological treason in this way. Treason may also be a paradoxical reaction to a deep-seated neurotic sense of guilt. The neurotic strategy of accumulating more guilt, coupled with the consequent development of an inner need for punishment, are often the basic causes of criminal action. The treacherous deed is done precisely in order to provoke punishment. Reich. Treason may also be paid adventure, as we find it in international espionage. This kind of life fascinates the immature mind, which lives in the world of mystery stories and fairy tales. Bribes with women or money make such treason even more attractive. The enemy gratifies economic and sexual needs, and the traitor is willing to sell his integrity to the highest bidder. Overt fear and panic can also cause treason. The whole psychology of totalitarian interview and interrogation is based on this principle. People can be frightened and brainwashed into treason. The development of loyalty.
And that was The Rape of the Mind by Joost-meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades, 40 tactics to defeat the radical left.
Rule 38. Under no circumstances let radicals control the rules of the game. If an active participant in a game were able to set the game's rules in real time, and if he were at the same time an unscrupulous man, in his zeal to win, he'd certainly concoct rules favorable to himself, all but ensuring his victory. Unilateral power to set rules imbues the rule maker with godlike invincibility. Scenarios such as these are thinly veiled Calvin ball, the game from Calvin and Hobbes, where the main character Calvin initiates an endless series of rule changes, all designed to set himself up to win. In war, you don't let your enemy dictate the terms of the battle to you. If you want to give yourself the best chance of achieving victory, you fight on your own terms. If possible, you don't fight in the enemy's chosen setting. You fight on your own terrain. You don't fight with weapons favored by the enemy. You fight with the weapons he fears most. You don't fight him at a time when he expects it. You fight him at the time he least expects it. You don't fight with tactics the enemy prefers. You fight him with tactics of which he's ignorant. Radicals have long been dictating to conservatives our rules of engagement, the rules controlling the outcome of our battle. Radicals have made a habit out of dictating those topics which are acceptable in public discourse. Through the bludgeon of political correctness, they've assumed the power to tell us what language we can use and what language we can't use when describing a problem. We can no longer speak our minds with clear diction. Instead, we're told to use muddled niceties out of sensitivity to the feelings of an ostensible victim class. Yet radicals can spew vitriol at retrogrades with impunity. Under the present Calvin Ball regime, for radicals, dissent against an unfavored administration is patriotic. On the other hand, when retrogrades dissent against an administration favored by radicals, it's an affront to the dignity of the office. Radicals can stage sit-ins and occupy vast areas of critical urban centers for weeks at a time to protest income inequality, but retrogrades must have a buffer zone to pray in front of abortion clinics. Radicals are free to hold gay pride parades in any locale in the nation, but retrogrades have to fight tooth and nail to get a permit for a straight pride parade in one city. Bigotry against Christians and Jews is openly embraced by radicals. Yet, if a retrograde so much as hints that Islam may be prone to violence, they are branded as hateful and Islamophobic. In fact, any time a retrograde reproaches some evil that radicals favor, we're called phobic for doing so, e.g. homophobic, Islamophobic, fatphobic, transphobic, and xenophobic. Retrogrades have allowed ourselves to be hapless victims of bullying for too long, acting like the overly passive friend who knows his peer is cheating at a board game, but does nothing about it. This paradigm must be altered, and it must be altered fast. If retrogrades are to prevail in the ongoing political cultural war, we cannot resign ourselves to sheepishness in the face of radical imperiousness. There's nothing to stop us from insisting on our own set of rules. And when radicals are forced to play on our turf, let's see who prevails.
Thank you, Mr. Timothy and David Gordon, for the rules for retrogrades. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese.
The Republican Party establishment always ends up fighting a two-front war between its base and the Democrats. Meanwhile, the Democrats come across as a united front. While that's not always the case, it appears that way because the Republican Party establishment consistently violates this commandment. An example from my own state's legislature illustrates my point. The Democrat state Senate leader in my state is a fearless hard-left ideologue, the sort of leader you love when he's on your team, hate when he's not. I can't recall a single time he's backed down to the Republicans on anything in the last 5 years. He ruthlessly pushes his agenda and rules with an iron fist. If any somewhat moderate Democrats, hey, I live in the heartland, there might still be a few. If any somewhat moderate Democrats get squishy, they get rolled. On the other hand, he protects the true believers with all his might. This sends a message. If you're on board with the ideological agenda, we've got your back. If you're not, we don't. Wouldn't you love this guy to be a conservative? But then there was the Republican speaker in my state house. He views himself as a consensus builder, not an ideologue, which really means he's middle management. He doesn't like to bring things up for a vote unless they'll pass and everyone in his majority is on the same page. His number one goal is not to advance the issues in the party platform. Rather, it is to maintain what he's told me, quote, a family atmosphere, and turn conservatives into, quote, team players. He's not a general. He's a babysitter. You know, like John Boehner. After getting the majority, he backed down on allowing votes on protecting Second Amendment rights and personhood in an effort to protect the squishiest in his own caucus. They didn't want grassroots to know where they truly stood on the issues because they wanted to avoid a primary. He put consensus ahead of convictions, and by doing so, he drove a wedge right through the middle of his own base. His problem is the newly elected conservatives of 2010 didn't go to my state capital to play footsie with Democrats and hold a never-ending schedule of fundraisers. They went there to get things done and then go home. So instead of falling in line with the rest of the groupthink, they used procedural motions to force Second Amendment and pro-life votes over the leadership's wishes. By standing for unity's sake, and not unifying his caucus around the principles that make us Republicans in the first place, my Republican speaker ended up fanning the very flames of conservative insurrection that he was trying to douse. In the spring of 2012, my state had a record number of primaries, and the Republican establishment lost almost all of them. The Republican Party establishment tried to blame it on redistricting, but the Democrats faced redistricting too. Yet they didn't face this level of internal turmoil. Why is that? Because their leader was leading on their issues. Our leader was the blind leading the blind. The Democrat leadership in my state legislature united around holding the line for the child killers, moral depravity lobby, educrats, and statists. Meanwhile, the Republican leadership, I guess we'll call it that, in my state legislature united around how they could diffuse conservative zeal. So they didn't offend the child killers, moral depravity lobby, educrats, and statists. One approach led to a united base. The other abandons your base and leads to a two-front war. A similar scene played out nationally during the great overhyped government shutdown of 2013. Rather than hold the line on defunding Obamacare, a majority of Senate Republicans sided with Harry Reid and against Senators Ted-Cruz, Mike Lee, and the American people. Rather than holding the line on defunding Obamacare, House Speaker John Boehner used Democrat votes to cave. This is what happens when you don't stand united on principle, but are a movement run by shills, gutless cowards, and feckless bureaucrats. There is no other way to spin this. Obama completely routed Republican leadership. He removed their manly parts and showed it to them on a national stage. He completely depanted them. Obama hasn't done much right during his presidency, which is why when the chips are down, he knows he can always pick a fight with Republican leadership. They have acted as his reliable slump buster throughout his presidency, and this time they came through big time. I loathe the GOP establishment with all my heart, but even I pitied them in this case. They think they're getting out of their consultant's doghouse, but what they're really doing is signing their own death certificates. Begrudgingly, give the devil his due. These statist progressives really know how to play the game. Then again, it helps when you actually believe in your cause. Right now, the people running our side don't believe in ours. The Republican Party establishment is struggling with the fact we in the grassroots are fighting back. They're used to the previous generation that just wanted to be patronized, validated with a pointless proclamation or a pro-life license plate, and then went home to play bingo or watch Murder, She Wrote. I recall a one-on-one meeting I had with a Republican leader early in my radio career when I was really ornery. No, really, I've actually mellowed out a little bit. Anyway, we were sitting down for breakfast, and as I'm eating my omelet, he proceeds to lecture me about how naive I am, about how the political process works, and that I'm asking for far too much. It sounded like a spiel he had given dozens of times to well-meaning but utterly harmless Christian conservatives who just don't know any better and think, "Thou must be nicer than God no matter what, while hell ruthlessly advances," is like the 11th commandment inadvertently left out of the Bible. He was about to find out I'm not one of those do-gooders who wears socks with sandals and gets up in the morning with a pair of khakis on. I let him ramble on, unchallenged, just long enough for me to finish my omelet. Forgive me, but I live in Iowa, where farm fresh food must come first. After I finished the last morsel, I looked at him and asked him if it was okay for me to respond to what he was saying. "Sure," he said. I looked him right in the eye, and I calmly said, "I want to quote for you the immortal words of the great prophet Nick Nolte in the movie 48 Hours. We ain't partners, we ain't brothers, and we ain't friends. I'm not a team player, and I don't want to be. I don't want to hang out with you. I already have a family, and my schedule is full. I get up in the morning and go work out. even if it doesn't look like it. Then I go to work. I come home. I play with my kids. After my kids go to bed, I play with my wife. And the process repeats itself the next day. Don't give me your card. I'm not giving you mine. I don't want your cell phone number, and I'm not giving you mine. I don't want to sit next to your political hacks at the party fundraiser. What I do want is for you to do your damn job, and that job is fighting for us on the issues we care the most about. If you do that, I will be the best friend you've ever had. But if you sell us out, I will make you hate life for 3 hours a day on a 50,000-watt radio station. Are we clear? Crystal, he replied. That's how it's done. This is how the employer, us, recovers the leverage with our employees, them. By the way, given his actions afterwards, it was obvious he didn't get the message. But he's out of politics now, and I'm still here, so he ended up getting it after all. These people work for us. They're not a ruling class, and they're not matinee idols on the cover of Tiger Beat. We must never forget that. And more importantly, we must never let them forget it either. We don't thank them for giving us our time or pose for pictures with them like we're groupies. Does your boss thank you for your time when he needs you to do your darn job? Does your boss pose for pictures with you and ask for your autograph? We need to stop feeding the animals and start reining them in. More and more of you are getting the picture, which is why more and more of them are losing their jobs. In the 2012 Texas Republican primary, 10 incumbents were defeated in one night. In the 2014 Texas Republican primary, it was a clean sweep for the Tea Party. God bless Texas. This trend needs to not just continue, but be ramped up even further. The Republicrats can't help but betray their own base because they're not one of us. It's like I said earlier in this book, show me your faith or your principles and I'll show you your works. You know a tree by its fruit. We fight because we're fighting for what we believe in. They obstruct because they're trying to stop what they don't. Unfortunately, it's not just the Republican Party establishment that violates this commandment, but sometimes conservatives as well. Take, for example, a man I really like. Rick Santorum's social conservative street cred is above reproach. For years, Santorum carried the water for social conservative causes and issues, earning the scorn of all the right people, like the liberal media and Republicrats like John McCain. Throughout the course of his underdog yet successful 2012 presidential campaign, he was the one candidate who most consistently defended America's Judeo-Christian moral tradition and effectively demonstrated the linkage between the growth of government and America's moral decline. So why did it take so long for Santorum to finally become the champion of this large block of values voters? Because a few years prior, Santorum abandoned his base by endorsing Arlen Specter, a rhino's rhino, over Pat Toomey in a hotly contested Pennsylvania Senate primary. In his next election, Santorum lost by 18 points, which remains one of the worst losses by an incumbent senator in American political history. When you throw in the fact Santorum wasn't saddled by a personal scandal, there is only one explanation for the magnitude of Santorum's defeat here. Some of his base stayed home, believing it wasn't worth it to go to the polls for someone they felt had abandoned them. Years later, I saw this on the 2012 Iowa caucus campaign trail. Santorum was a frequent guest on my program, and every time he came on, I would receive calls, emails, and Facebook posts from conservatives who wanted me to ask him about his Specter endorsement. That endorsement was seen as such a betrayal that many conservatives treated Santorum as if he didn't have a record in the U.S. Senate that on several key issues would have been one of the most conservative of his era. It was like Santorum had become his middle name, and he was now known as Rick Santorum, who endorsed Arlen Specter. I know a couple of Iowa caucus activists that wouldn't agree to support Santorum until he looked them in the eye and promised he'd never endorse someone like Specter again. By the way, Santorum said one of the reasons he made a bargain with Specter to help him in his primary was because Specter promised to help shepherd President George W. Bush's judicial appointments through a testy nomination process. Specter was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time. One of those appointments Santorum wanted Specter's help with is now Chief Justice John Roberts, a man who did as much damage to the Constitution in 1 week in 2012 that most liberals can only hope to achieve in a lifetime. Roberts was the deciding vote in the U.S. Supreme Court, telling the sovereign state of Arizona it has no authority to enforce the U.S. Constitution, even though the sovereignty of the states precedes the Constitution, and the Constitution required ratification from the states to become law. That whole, government by the consent of the governed thing. Then Roberts was the deciding vote in telling the federal government it has unlimited jurisdiction into the lives of American citizens, provided it uses the 16th Amendment as the means to tread on us. Roberts was even willing to allow the federal government to tax us for what we're not doing, which is unprecedented in American history. By positing this, Roberts went so far as to restructure the mandate within Obamacare as a spoonful of sugar to help the bitter medicine go down. Now, if that's not legislating from the bench, I don't know what is. These two opinions by Roberts are not just unconstitutional, they are anti-constitutional. They clearly are anti both the spirit and explicit wording of the U.S. Constitution, which is intended to limit the jurisdiction of the federal government in order to maximize the freedom and liberty of the individual, as well as that of these United States of America. Fast forward to 2012, and Toomey returned the favor by endorsing Romney over Santorum in the Pennsylvania presidential primary.
And that was the next segment of this chapter in Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Now, a couple of things. First of all, what he was just talking about with Rick Santorum and more specifically with Roberts. And part of the problem that we're having here, and again, is with justices, is we have to get rid of the notion that the government has rights. John Roberts is a guy that believes, that's where partially where you get this rhino thing, but because conservatives know only the people have rights, government has none. The liberals want to believe that the government does have rights and that the job of the judiciary is to balance those rights, the rights of the government versus the rights of the people, and that the judge or justice has to decide whose rights are paramount at any given time. And that's what Justice Roberts was doing in the two particular cases that Steve Deese cited. So that's the thing that you need to remind people, particularly the people that are running for office. Ask them flat out: does the government have rights? And or tell them the government has no rights, and so they need to act accordingly. If we get to the position where we get enough people in this country that understand that the government has no rights, and this whole idea of government rights goes all the way back to 1900 with Herbert Crowley, then we can go ahead and we don't have to worry about what the political affiliation of judges or justices are, because at that particular point, once everybody understands the government has no rights, now it's just a simple matter of applying the law to particular situations, and you're all set. Now, as far as what he was talking about in regards to Rick Santorum, really what needs to happen is for us to recruit, because he was talking about party bosses and basically, how it's a top-down kind of world in politics right now, and it's that way because Republicans don't feel comfortable becoming Democrats, and Democrats don't feel comfortable being Republicans because Republicans and Democrats don't like each other. So we have to break that down. We have to make sure that both the parties are trying to compete for all voters, no matter whether you're Second Amendment or your abortion or whatever it is, other than socialism, that both parties are competing for all voters. Once that starts happening, then we are in charge again. We become the bosses, and they become basically salesmen. They come out and say, hey, you want to be a Democrat because we're better on the Second Amendment than the Republicans are. And the Republicans will say, well, you want to be a Republican because we're better on the environment than the Democrats are. That's the way it should be. If competition in business is good, then competition in politics is absolutely essential. Back in a minute. God grant me Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Often at the beginning of the spiritual journey, we have a lot of consolations. There's a lot of positive feeling associated with it. But then God, almost invariably, John on the cross says, will take that away. Because you're not meant to fall in love with the good feelings. You're meant to fall in love with God's will. I remember Thomas Merton, he has these famous talks he gave to the novices. There's a reference in the Bible to the arms of God, being grasped by the arms of God. And Merton said, well, God doesn't have any arms, but he's got a will. Well, that's it, is to rest in the arms of God means to surrender to his will. And that's it. That's Christian spirituality in a nutshell, is discern the divine will and then surrender to it in a cooperative way. The rest is a footnote. That's what.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Stuart Varney helping me prove a point.
This morning. Keith, why is the market rallying when you have all hell breaking loose in Israel?
I know. What a question, right? So there are two things. I've been up most of the night watching this pretty closely. One, there was rumor that there was going to be a temporary ceasefire, some sort of peace arrangement to allow humanitarian stuff in and out of the Gaza Strip.
There you go. This is what I was talking about with when Israel acknowledges hostages and then they acknowledge that there are civilians in the Gaza Strip. The next step is, of course, humanitarian aid, because the news media that hates Israel is going to make damn sure that they tie Israel's hands so that Israel can do minimal amounts of damage to Hamas, and Hamas ends up winning this war and winning it without even really much of a fight on the part of the Israelis. And this is the way they always do it. I've seen this over and over and over and over again. So they get the acknowledgement that there are civilians in Gaza. Then they say, we have to provide humanitarian aid. Therefore, we should have a ceasefire. And then after that, a peace treaty or some type of a settlement. And guess what? The media has now gone ahead and secured a victory for Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran. So don't be fooled. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
Now then, this is a pivotal moment for the Biden presidency. If Iran unleashes Hezbollah to attack Israel, will our president unleash our military? On 60 Minutes, he warned Iran against any attack, saying simply, don't. He has moved 2 carrier strike groups to the immediate area. Our power is in place, ready to be used. The Iranians continue to make threats. Their foreign minister says, I want to warn the war criminals and those who support this entity before it's too late to stop the crimes against civilians in Gaza. Any step the resistance will take will cause a huge earthquake in the Zionist entity. He says Iranian hands are already on the trigger. That is a clear threat. And in the last 24 hours, Fox's Trey Yingst reports rockets and anti-tank missiles have been fired at Israel from Lebanon, 1 Israeli soldier killed. In other words, Biden lays down a red line. The Iranians are very close to crossing it if they haven't already. Biden's credibility is at stake. It's worth remembering that President Obama told Syria's leader, hey, quit gassing your own citizens. That was Obama's red line. The Syrians crossed it. Obama did nothing. He didn't want to upset the Iran nuclear deal. He lost credibility. Now it's Biden being tested, again by Iran. Fail the test by failing to make a red line stick, and war will consume this president. Second hour of Varney, just getting started.
So I can't believe it. Did he really say that Biden's credibility is at stake? Does he really think that President Biden has any credibility? Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand quote of the day.
Evil theories have to rely on evil means in order to hold their victims. altruism and collectivism cannot appeal to human virtues. They have to appeal to human weaknesses. And where there are not enough weaknesses, they have to manufacture them. It is in the nature of altruism and collectivism that the more they need a person or a group, the more they denounce their victims, induce guilt, and struggle never to let the victims discover their own importance and acquire self-esteem.
And that was the Ayn Rand quote of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of Senator Ted Cruz.
Absolutely, yes. And remember, Hamas is a proxy for Iran. Hezbollah is a proxy for Iran. Both are directed by Iran. Both are funded by Iran. Both are controlled by Iran. This attack was planned by Iran. It was funded by Iran. It was directed by Iran. And Israel is resolved. Look, Israel exists only because it is strong enough to defeat its enemies. That's why Israel exists. And I'll tell you what Hamas's strategy is. They are counting on left-wing Democrats and the useful idiots in the corporate media to be their biggest ally, because as Israel mounts this ground offensive, goes to defeat Hamas, one of the tragic consequences we know we're going to see Palestinian civilian casualties. The reason we know that is Hamas wants Palestinian civilian casualties. Hamas uses Palestinian civilians as human shields. Back in 2014, which was the last major rocket assault by Hamas on Israel, I authored a bipartisan resolution in the Senate with Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat from New York, condemning Hamas's use of human shields as a war crime. This is something they do systematically. As you noted, Israel is going to extraordinary lengths to tell Palestinian civilians to get out of harm's way. There is no military on planet Earth that does more to avoid civilian deaths, but Hamas wants Palestinian civilians. They want women and children killed because they'll then point to the bodies and count on the marionettes in the media to immediately begin denouncing Israel. That's part of their war plan, is to undermine Israel. And so it is incumbent on the rest of us to tell the truth and not fall victim for that propaganda game that is part of their war plan.
And that was Senator Ted Cruz. Now, what he said was that at the end there was very, very important, where he wakes up and realizes that he calls it corporate media, but all media, corporate, schmorporate, paborporate. Nobody, there's nothing, the only news that I know of that's nonprofit is C-SPAN. Everything else is for-profit news, and all the for-profit news places are anti-Israel. They can get away with it because they can claim that they cover Hamas or give Hamas kind of glowing coverage because it sells, because it gets them ratings, and that's the name of the game. And no capitalist worth his salt is then going to start complaining about that, because then they end up looking like a hypocrite. But the fact is that the media hates Israel, wants to see Israel defeated, but of course they can't come out and deal with it directly. So they deal with it indirectly by talking about hostages and civilians. And today there was a situation where already there was people calling for a ceasefire because they said that there was inhumane or a humanitarian catastrophe that was going on or about to go on in Gaza. So already they're calling for ceasefire. Israel hasn't even really got started. They haven't even started the ground assault yet, and already people are calling for a ceasefire. And this is the way it always goes. Because Israel could have run these people off the face of the earth decades ago, but it didn't happen because they fall in the trap of admitting, yes, there's civilians in Gaza. Then after that, it's just a matter of the news media ginning up enough pressure on Israel by claiming that there's all kinds of unneeded or unnecessary civilian deaths occurring, not necessarily even due to combat, but because the lights have been shut out and there's no electricity and all that stuff. So that means that people can't get clean water, and so there's cholera and there's blah, 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 blah. And they bring their cameras in there, show a couple of sick people, and then the next thing you know, they're, again, clamoring for a ceasefire and for a negotiated settlement to the whole issue. And when that happens, Hamas wins, Hezbollah wins, Iran wins. And that can't happen. Israel needs to win. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, presents the Medal of Honor.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we come before you on this very special occasion from different backgrounds and cultures and expressions of faith toward you. But we all come as Americans and those who love her, those who have sacrificed for her, who have bled for her, and who have died for her. Today, as we gather in our nation's most sacred home, we have the privilege to witness, to celebrate, and to honor an extraordinary naval career and a life that has been set apart and called to service and devotion to this nation and those in it. Today, we are among the most privileged to watch as our nation's highest honor of special trust, achievement, and fidelity is both given and received from our nation's commander-in-chief to a leader of naval warriors whose opinion was sought, whose sacrifices were selfless, and whose dedication to duty is unparalleled by any standard. Today, we lift up and honor our very own Master Chief, Britt Sablinski, as our nation's Medal of Honor is bestowed upon him. May he also take with him the absolute certainty in knowing that his days given to this great nation, to our beloved Navy, and to the warriors of naval special warfare were of value beyond measure. We, as his fellow Americans, brother and sister warriors, friends and family alike, collectively ask for your blessing upon our great president, this great naval warrior, these great military families, and all they do, have done, and will continue to do from this day forward. On this most solemn occasion, on this sacred ground, we as his teammates say, well done. And finally, whether swimming the depths, climbing the highest of mountains, or soaring through the heavens, as we walk that lonely road of faith, may you always go with us. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much, Chaplain. It's beautiful. And thank you to Deputy Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan. Thank you, Patrick. Undersecretary of the Navy Thomas Modley. Thank you, Thomas. VA Secretary nominee, do a fantastic job for us, Robert Wilkie, and Congressman Scott Taylor and Brian Mast. Thank you, fellas, very much. Thank you. Members of the armed forces and distinguished guests, please sit down. That actually worked out very nicely. And join me in officially welcoming Master Chief Britt Slabinski to the White House. Special man, a truly brave person. Today we pay tribute to Britt's heroic service, and we proudly present him with our nation's highest military honor, and I would go so far as to say our nation's highest honor. Joining Britt today is his son, Bryce. Bryce, thank you very much. A rising senior at a wonderful school known to the world as Ohio State. Great place. That's a great school. Along with Britt's sisters, Brenda, Antika, and Brenda's husband, Tom. Thank you very much for being here. Here as well are Britt's significant other, Christina, and her two children, John and Megan, who we just met in the Oval Office. That's a special place, too. Thank you all for joining us for this really special day and special ceremony. Thank you very much. Finally, we're honored to be joined by several previous Congressional Medal of Honor recipients. Would you please stand? Would you please stand? Thank you, friend. Thank you, friend. Very, very special people. Your names and your immortal acts of valor are forever engraved in the memory of our nation. Our nation will always be grateful to you, and you know that. Today, we induct a new name into the world's most exclusive gathering of heroes, and that's exactly what it is. Britt was raised in Northampton, Massachusetts. He became an Eagle Scout by the age of 14. His father was a veteran who served as a frogman in the underwater demolitions group of the U.S. Navy. It was a tough people. While Britt was in junior high, his dad brought him to their reunion. Britt was inspired by their bond of friendship, their stories of service, and their boundless love of country. As soon as he graduated from high school in 1988, Britt enlisted in the Navy to become a SEAL. That means he is a physically very strong person, and that also means he is a mentally very strong person. That's tough. Throughout the grueling months of training, Britt proved himself every single step of the way. In 1990, he graduated the legendary BUDS training course, and he earned that special badge worn only by the bravest few, the SEAL Trident. In 2002, Britt was called to support Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. In the late evening hours of March 3rd that year, he led an elite team on a combat mission to establish a secure position on the peak of a 10,000-foot mountain known as Thakur Ghar. Britt and his teammates were preparing to exit the helicopter onto the mountain when their aircraft was struck by a machine gun and machine gun fire like they've never seen before, and a rocket-propelled grenade from Al-Qaeda terrorists down below. Not a good feeling. As the helicopter lurched away from the assault, Petty Officer First Class Neil Roberts was flung out of the aircraft. Tremendous, tremendous, horrible thing to witness. And onto the side of the mountain before the helicopter crashed into the valley below. After surviving barely the violent crash, Britt and his team were retrieved by a second helicopter. also, by the way, piloted by very brave people. At this point, Brit received information suggesting their comrade, Neil Roberts, the man thrown out of the helicopter, was probably still alive. The team faced a choice to wait for reinforcements and pretty much safety, or to return immediately to the enemy stronghold in the hope of saving Neil's life. They would be outmanned, outgunned, and fighting uphill on a steep, icy mountain, and every soldier knows you don't want to fight uphill. They learned that at Gettysburg. You don't fight uphill. But they would face freezing temperatures and bitter winds at the highest altitude of battle in the history of the American military. This was the highest point where we ever fought. The odds were not good. They were not in their favor. But Britt and his team didn't even hesitate for a moment. They made their decision. For them, it was an easy one. They went back to that mountain. When their helicopter reached the mountain peak, they jumped out into a furious onslaught of machine gun fire like none of them had ever seen before. Britt and his teammate, Sergeant John Chapin, charged uphill toward the enemy, where John was shot after clearing a bunker. Britt continued to engage the enemy, repeatedly exposing himself to horrendous fire. Two of his other teammates, Stephen Turbo Tobas and Brett Morganti, both suffered very, very serious leg injuries. Britt helped them to safety and called in airstrikes as continuous fire drove them ever further down the face of the mountain. Got worse and worse, more and more dangerous. He kept going. In a treacherous descent, Britt and his men carried Turbo through the snow. At one point, they fashioned a makeshift harness out of their gun straps to hoist Turbo down a 13-foot cliff. In itself, treacherous, because if you miss that little area, they go down the mountain. There's no stopping them. When they could go no further, Britt tended to the wounded and coordinated their escape until his team was finally evacuated from enemy territory. 7 of the brave men who fought with Britt are here with us today, and maybe they'll stand up as I call their name. Petty Officer, 2nd Class, Brett Morganti. Pretty dangerous place, huh? Way to go, Brett. Chief Warrant Officer, Kyle Soderberg. Thank you, Kyle. Petty Officer, 2nd Class, Stephen Tobas. Thanks, Stephen. Chief Warrant Officer, Al Mack. Thank you. Sergeant Christopher Cunningham. Master Sergeant Eric Stebner. A Master Chief Petty Officer, still on active duty, is quietly not with us today. I just want to thank you all. Unbelievable acts of bravery. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Incredible. Today, we also remember the brave soldiers who gave their lives on that mountain. Technical Sergeant John Chapin, Corporal Matthew Commons, Specialist Mark Anderson, Sergeant Bradley Cross, Senior Airman Jason Cunningham, Technical Sergeant Philip Spivak, and of course, Petty Officer 1st Class Neil Roberts, who met a horrible death, for whom these events are now known. It's called the Battle of Roberts Ridge. incredible event. To the Gold Star family members of those heroes who are here today, please stand up. Please stand up. Please. It's an honor to have you accept our nation's profound sorrow and a deep love and everlasting gratitude. These were incredible, incredible men, and you can be proud that they were in your family, and they are looking down right now, and they are very, very proud of you. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you. To Britt and to all of the men of Roberts Ridge, you waged a fierce fight against the enemies, and these really have become the enemies of America and the enemies of all civilization. Through your actions, you demonstrated that there is no love more pure and no courage more great than the love and courage that burns in the hearts of American patriots. We are free because warriors like you are willing to give their sweat, their blood, and if they have to, their lives for our great nation. Britt, you went on to serve many more years in the U.S. Navy before finally retiring in 2014. Today, he continues his life of serving by volunteering with the Navy SEAL Foundation and on behalf of Gold Star families, special, incredible families. And as one of his fellow service members testifies, he is an amazing father to Bryce, who, like his dad, is now an Eagle Scout. Britt wants the country to know that for him, the recognition he is about to receive is an honor that falls on the whole team. He wants you folks to know that, on the whole team, on every American warrior who fought the forces of terror on that snowy Afghan ridge. Each of them has entered the eternal chronicle of American valor and American bravery. Britt, we salute you. We thank you. We thank God for making you a United States SEAL. We love our Navy SEALs. They're very special, very incredible people. It's now my tremendous privilege to present to you the Congressional Medal of Honor. And I'd like the military aide to come forward and please read the citation. Thank you.
The President of the United States, in the name of the Congress, takes pleasure in presenting the Medal of Honor to Senior Chief Special Warfare Operator, Sea, Air, and Land, Britt K. Slabinski, United States Navy, for service as set forth in the following: for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while assigned to a joint task force in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. In the early morning of March 4th, 2002, Senior Chief Special Warfare Operator Slabinski led a reconnaissance team to its assigned area atop a 10,000-foot snow-covered mountain. Their insertion helicopter was suddenly riddled with rocket-propelled grenades and small arms fire from previously undetected enemy positions. The crippled helicopter lurched violently and ejected one teammate onto the mountain before the pilots were forced to crash land in the valley far below. Senior Chief Slabinski boldly rallied his 5 remaining team members and marshaled supporting assets for an assault to rescue their stranded teammate. During reinsertion, the team came under fire from 3 directions, and one teammate started moving uphill toward an enemy strongpoint. Without regard for his own safety, Senior Chief Slabinski charged directly toward enemy fire to join his teammate. Together, they fearlessly assaulted and cleared the first bunker they encountered. The enemy then unleashed a hail of machine gun fire from a second hardened position only 20 meters away. Senior Chief Slabinski repeatedly exposed himself to deadly fire to personally engage the second enemy bunker and orient his team's fires in the furious close-quarters firefight. Proximity made air support impossible, and after several teammates became casualties, the situation became untenable. Senior Chief Slabinski maneuvered his team to a more defensible position, directed airstrikes in very close proximity to his team's position, and requested reinforcements. As daylight approached, accurate enemy mortar fire forced the team further down the sheer mountainside. Senior Chief Slabinski carried a seriously wounded teammate through deep snow and led a difficult trek across precipitous terrain while calling in fire on the enemy, which was engaging the team from the surrounding ridges. Throughout the next 14 hours, Senior Chief Slabinski stabilized casualties and continued the fight against the enemy until the hill was secured and his team was extracted. By his undaunted courage, bold initiative, leadership, and devotion to duty, Senior Chief Slabinski reflected great credit upon himself and upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service.
And that was former President Donald Trump awarding the Medal of Honor. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.